Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Outside the Box. I'm your host, Ben Rogers, and I'm with a good friend of mine in Zack Kramer today. And, Zach's been on the show a few different times. We'll link up those previous podcasts in the show notes and the descriptions, whether you're watching this on YouTube or listening through your favorite podcast platform. Zach, how's it going, man?
It's going good. How are y'all doing?
Wonderful. And, things have been wild in 2022, and for the people who need a quick recap, tell us kind of what you're up to. What are you doing right now?
Okay. Right now I run a kind of remote training business. So basically physical training geared around breath and mobility, especially with strength involved. So I kind of have a wide range of mostly athletes, ranging from like cyclists to MMA, jiu-jitsu type guys and girls. But then I've also, because of my specialty in breathing, end up working with a lot of people just with breathing issues, whether that's from sleep apnea or long haul COVID.
Can you talk to us a little bit about breath and mobility? Because I know that's something that you specialize in. What does that mean, for the layman out there? I have an idea with breath, but mobility, I think of flexibility,
right.
Functional movements. Can you just talk to us a little bit about kind of that world?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically I got to it because I did physical training through like CrossFit and other strength training for so long. And I realized the biggest way I saw a difference in people's strength gains and just overall physical abilities was by getting them more range of motion that they could use during their strength exercises. So when I say mobility, what I think of is not just flexibility, which would be like the ability to, put your hands over your head or do the splits, but mobility is actually being able to use that range of motion. So being strong, being flexible, but being strong through that entire range that you can put your body through.
I kind of equate this like I do a lot of things to tennis, and there is, there's an idea around like efficiency with your stroke, but also, the longer the stroke, the more power you get.
Right.
And I've often thought about, like with push-ups, you see people do 1,000,000 push-ups, but they're kind of doing a half push-up versus the people who, fully extend. What is it about a full range of motion that leads to getting stronger in power?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things I'd say is, one, you're not going to compensate with, so if I can actually put my hands all the way over my head to do a press, I'm actually using my shoulders to press the weight, versus if I'm standing here and I can't just put my hands over my head, in order to get that weight overhead, I'm going to have to lean back or do something kind of wonky with my back to actually get it over my head. So that's an easy one to do at home. Like most people can't put their arms overhead without bending their back. So one, you'll actually be strengthening the muscles you should be for your shoulder and for pressing. And this is kind of applicable across all joints. Just as an example of the shoulder. And then two, you're going to reduce your injuries from kind of compensating joints like your lower back. So again, if you think about like a serve in tennis, maybe like if you can actually use your shoulder for the serve, because you're going to reach further back with your shoulder, you're not going to be reaching back by arching your back to generate that power. You're actually going to be using your shoulder. So it's just trying to use the right joint.
Yeah. So, I can totally relate when, we often recruit muscles that we're not supposed to be using for an exercise in order to complete an exercise. And, sometimes that can lead to injury or overuse in certain areas, or even like imbalances.
Yes.
So full range of motion, that's important as we get older. Real quick, piece of advice for anybody who's listening that's lifting in the gym. What's, how do we get more range of motion? Just, if we're in the gym doing regular types of exercise.
I'd say probably the biggest thing, easiest thing to do to just be take your time on the exercises and focus on going through the full range of motion. If it's a row or a push-up, whatever it is, do those like far of a range on each end of that movement as you can. There's also a lot of resources out there. If you can look on my website, YouTube channel, or just search daily CARs, just like you drive a car, daily CARs. Those exercises called CARs are what I recommend to all my clients. And so it's like a kind of like a daily routine that I go through every day.
Interesting. We'll put both those links in the description below, guys, in the edit of this podcast. You mentioned breath, and we've had you on here talking about nose breathing in particular. Can you talk to us a little bit about where things are at with breath work? What are some things you're doing with clients as well as yourself right now?
So with athletes, we're definitely still working a lot on CO2 tolerance, which maybe we'll get into a little bit later. But what's been interesting lately is it's really developing in the sleep and really the sleep world, which kind of coming at from two different areas that I've kind of been connected to recently are from like sleep centers working on sleep apnea, but also from dentistry, because those sides are so connected in sleeping and then with breathing properly. So there's kind of like all these different facets are coming together, especially around sleep and just overall well-being now.
So how are you looking at that? Because I know, from I don't know. I think I would assume from a dentist perspective that, that's airways. So, are you getting enough air? And in terms of sleep apnea, I'll let you describe that kind of your definition of it. The way I think of it is you periodically stop breathing during the course of the night, and that can wreak havoc on your heart health. It causes weight gain, things of that nature. What's kind of your description? How are you describing it to clients?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, apnea, and just the word apnea means a breath hold. So sleep apnea, when you're sleeping, you hold your breath. And yeah, essentially what happens is it keeps you from getting as deep of sleep. And we know if you don't get good sleep, I mean, that's kind of the crux of things, is you're not getting the sleep you need to be healthy because your breathing is so messed up at night. And there's definitely a wide range of sleep apnea. I mean, even just simple snoring a lot of the times can be kind of considered mild sleep apnea because it's affecting your breathing. But then you have obstructive sleep apnea, which is what you hear a lot about, because in obstructive sleep apnea, that means there's something actually happening in your airway that's blocking the air. So it's not just that you're somehow holding your breath for no reason. It's something is happening to actually block the airflow that you're getting.
And is that more from a dentistry perspective? And that's kind of where they come in?
A lot of the times it's diagnosed in dentistry because they can see easily. They're the ones in your mouth looking around. So it can be your soft palate, which is kind of like the back roof of your mouth can collapse, which can block that airway. Or your tongue, most of the time it's your tongue can fall back and that blocks your airway. That's obstructive sleep apnea. So either one of those two can kind of constrict that area. But a lot of the times, where I kind of, we'll get into all this, but that's mostly because of mouth breathing.
Got it. So you're looking at it from the perspective of most of the time, the root cause of this is being a mouth breather.
Being a mouth breather or being overweight. Now, obviously, there are people who have structural issues that have to be taken care of. So this is not this is more like mild to moderate sleep apnea. This is not,
Sure. Well, I mean, and that's, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think more people than we realize suffer from a mild form of sleep apnea. And, if you're struggling just a little bit with, holding your breath periodically through the night, like it can really, over a long period of time, it could really have devastating effects on your health. And we talk a lot about how important sleep is. How does nose breathing, because I know a lot of this just goes back to nose breathing, sounds so simple, hard to execute on.
Super easy.
So tell us a little bit why, it's so hard to do, and yet it can have all these beneficial effects on people's lives.
Okay. So big question. I'll try to start with, like you said, why is it hard to do?
Yeah. Because it sounds like such a simple solution, and yet I know so many people struggle with it, and so many people feel like they, I know people who wear Breathe Right strips. People
Mhm.
feel like they can't get enough air through their nose.
Right.
And, and I just know all the benefits of nose breathing. And
Yes.
I know some of it's the CO2 tolerance, which I want to
Yeah.
pick your brain on here in a bit. But,
That's kind of
why
where I was going to
isn't it,
start.
why isn't it just like as simple as, hey guys, nose breathe, you'll be good to go.
Mhm. Because I mean, it does. We'll jump right into that CO2 tolerance
Yeah.
idea because CO2 is stressful. So if we, again, like go back to the basics, we breathe in oxygen, breathe out CO2 to make it as simple as possible. And CO2 is really the impetus to make us want to breathe. So when we hold our breath, we feel like we're suffocating. It's because of that rise in CO2. So what happens when you close your mouth, if somebody tells you just to nose breathe and you close your mouth, well, you're not breathing out as much CO2. So those levels of CO2 kind of rise in your system and you feel that, and it's a stressful, anxious feeling. So people don't like it, and so they open their mouth to get rid of more CO2 to feel better. So that's kind of like because
Is
we
there a
breathe through it.
reason? Is there a reason
What?
why that's stressful? Because if it's, the more you can tolerate, the better. Why is our brain signaling that something bad is happening?
When we get more CO2.
When we don't have enough. When we
Yeah,
have
when
too much.
CO2 goes too high.
Yeah,
Well, again, couple different reasons here. One, our body is very concerned about pH balance. We're going to go like super deep into
yeah,
the nerdy
yeah.
chemistry here. You think about things like you go back to high school chemistry class. Some things are more basic, some things are more acidic, and that affects the pH balance of liquids or whatever you want to talk about. But that same thing is going on inside of our body, and our body is very sensitive to the pH balance. We want to be balanced. We don't want to be too basic, too acidic. So if the CO2 levels rise, we become too acidic, and our body wants to keep that balance. So it's going to want us to open our mouth and get rid of
Got it.
more CO2 to get back to that baseline. But if we are mouth breathing all the time, that kind of tolerance for CO2 goes down. We get used to a lower or a higher pH, and basically that becomes our new status quo. So as soon as it starts to go above that again, our body feels that trigger in CO2 or that acidity, and we want to mouth breathe. Another way of looking at it is if we think back to the idea that when we hold our breath for a long time, like at the end of the day, our body just wants to keep us alive. So if we know that CO2 is the trigger to breathe, that's what tells us to open our mouth and breathe. Like if that CO2 goes up, our body is just very aware that that's a trigger to breathe and we have to stay alive. So it's going to be the most kind of stressful thing. In fact, people who aren't scared of anything else, they'll feel fear only, like literally if your amygdala is injured, you'll still feel fear only when CO2 rises. It's the only trigger that can make those people feel fear is CO2 going up, because it's such a base input to be scared and breathe.
That's interesting. And I'm guessing that, the more you nose breathe and the more you kind of force yourself to do it, your body starts to get used to it, and your tolerance level goes up. The same way that, if I'm running and training regularly, I can run for a longer period of time. Is that kind of a similar analogy, I guess?
You're just saying like you can train to use that higher. Yeah, absolutely.
That's right. That's right. So, so this is something that we all can practice. And we originally, we were talking this weekend about, sleep apnea and some things that you're doing for it. Let's bring it back to sleep apnea, because I know a lot of people can relate to this. How are you helping people through breath work with sleep apnea?
Yeah. So since we've been talking about CO2, I'll go back to that again. If we have a low tolerance to CO2, it leads us to mouth breathe. And so if we have a low tolerance to CO2, the same thing is going to happen, especially when we're not conscious of it. It's going to be a lot easier to close our mouths and nasal breathe when we're thinking about it. But when we're asleep, we don't have any control.
Right.
So if we have that low tolerance to CO2 and we fall asleep, we're very quickly going to start mouth breathing, which can lead us to letting that tongue collapse in the back. Also, just mouth breathing throughout the night keeps us in a more stressed out state. So you think about somebody mouth breathing,
yeah,
It's a lot more labored. You're a lot more just spending energy, more awake, alert. So if you're trying to sleep and you're breathing like that versus a slow in and out your nose, you're just not getting as relaxed as you should be when you sleep. I mean, that's really the time we should be the most relaxed throughout our day is when we're sleeping. So that's one thing, is just working on their CO2 tolerance. And we do that through all sorts of ways. Really, I kind of use a personalized approach to match kind of their day-to-day things with how they could work on building their CO2 tolerance, whether it's breath holds or maybe it's going on walks and controlling how many steps you have during each breath, or maybe it's specific, almost meditative type breath work, kind of whatever fits people's particular lifestyle to build their CO2 tolerance. But we were talking about this, I can't remember if we were recording yet or not, but we talked about mouth tape also.
Yep.
And so definitely recommend mouth tape to people. Basically, it doesn't have to be anything crazy. It can be like a small little piece of cloth tape right over the middle of your lips. You're not duct taping your whole face closed. They also make, like, I've got some tape, like this is called Vio tape, and then they make some Somnifix is another good brand that they make it specifically for your mouth so that it's not as overwhelming to tape your mouth at night. But that helps you keep your mouth closed. And basically, if you keep your mouth closed, we're talking about your tongue falling back and blocking your airways. Well, that can't happen when you have your mouth closed, because your tongue naturally will rest on the roof of your mouth, and like the tip of it will be right behind the front of your teeth. So if you just did this right now, you close your mouth, your tongue kind of naturally goes up and rests on the roof of your mouth, and that keeps it from collapsing in your airway while you're sleeping.
Is there any, well, this is a selfish question, because I mentioned how, I'm working on my CO2 tolerance, and what do you do with that panicky feeling when it's like as well as anybody, trying to get that last rep in at the gym, and you're like, can I get there? Can I get get on the rack? And I feel that way with CO2 tolerance when I'm working on my nose breathing. Is there any sort of thing that, like, from a meditative standpoint, or just to keep my mouth closed, even though I feel like I
you
just
you can always work out with less intensity is one thing. I mean, that's gonna lower that CO2, because when you're exercising, basically, you're generating a lot more CO2 than just sitting still.
Right.
So that's why you feel it even faster when you're exercising and trying to nasal breathe. You're not letting that out like you would if you're mouth breathing. But so you could just always lower the intensity if you're trying to like meet that threshold. I would think about it kind of like threshold training, right? If you ever done like running or biking or anything like that, you want to get right to that limit of your anabolic threshold or VO2 max, and then hang out right there. So you're only gradually increasing that tolerance. What you don't want to do is go break straight through there and burn out immediately. You want to kind of gradually build up to it. So like, I would just recommend going longer right at that threshold of when you feel like you need to open your mouth, versus going super hard and seeing if you can hang on with your mouth closed. Two would be, like you said, a meditative kind of state of mind. And I think that definitely, if you're really just trying to like challenge yourself with the CO2 tolerance, that comes in big. Like, you've got to be almost paying attention to the sensations you have, not trying to just ignore them. I would recommend leaning into it almost. And like paying attention to the sensations that come up when that CO2 rises. But then also you don't always have to just fight against that CO2. It's okay to work then also your recovery. So like you mentioned a rowing workout earlier. Totally fine some days to try to challenge yourself like that, but other days see how fast you can recover your breath and go into some mouth breathing, some nose mouth breathing, and then back into nose. So I mean,
if you're going, we were talking about Tabata workouts where you're supposed to go as hard as you can during that 20 seconds and then rest for 10. Theoretically, if you're going as hard as you can, the focus should be on the effort, not necessarily, maintaining nose breathing. And so I mean, would you agree with that? If I'm trying to do a Tabata workout with nose breathing, I guess there's a balance. You could, go as hard as you can while nose breathing.
Right.
But it might not be a bad thing if you, open your mouth a couple times.
Right. And yeah, I mean, what you could do is say, I want to nasal breathe during the 20-second all out sprint and see what I can hang on to. And then during that 10 seconds, go to mouth breathing and see how quickly I can recover. And then to be able to nose breathe the next one. So you see, like, you could go all out and see how many times you could hang on to that pace by having great recovery in between. So it definitely just depends on kind of like the training stimulus you want. What are you looking for that day?
Are you trying to do all your workouts nose breathing, or are you kind of just being intentional when you do choose to do that? What's your philosophy with yourself?
Well, I am very used to nose breathing now. And honestly, it's to the point now for me where I have to make a conscious decision to open my mouth. So there's certain days where if I know I want to really push the intensity, then I'll say, okay, I'm going to mouth breathe during the day because I want to see how hard I can go. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question or not, but I'd say, 99% is nose breathing.
But one thing that's interesting that I've also heard is that your stamina is actually longer when you learn to nose breathe because you're more efficient. So there is the argument that you can actually go harder nose breathing than you could mouth breathing. Is that in your experience, is that accurate?
I would say for like longer style things, that's absolutely accurate. And even if you're trying to pace something, so if you're thinking about like a metabolic conditioning session, like a CrossFit workout or something, and it's longer, 20 minutes, I would definitely recommend people start off nasal breathing at least, and then when they want to kick it up or whatever. But I mean, I think at the end of the day, we should be in that range where we can nasal breathe most of the time. But there are times where we want to practice max out intensity. And at that point, that's when we want to breathe through our mouths. It's a great ability. Some animals cannot breathe through their mouths. And so we have a great ability to open up and pump extra CO2 out to go at higher intensities.
That's interesting. I want to tie this back to sleep apnea again and long COVID, which is kind of a buzzword these days.
It means a lot of different things, I think.
Yeah. And, and the way we've defined long COVID at Performance Medicine is, and I think most people would define it this way as well, is if you're still experiencing symptoms of COVID after one month after testing negative. And we've talked a lot about how long COVID can precipitate sleep apnea. What have you been seeing with your clients, with people in your practice? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest people that come to me with that are people who just don't feel like they can catch their breath. Like it's been a while since they had COVID, and then they just feel like, man, I know I used to be in better shape, and for some reason, like I'll be sitting around, I just go pick someone up, and I still can't catch my breath. What's going on? And obviously, like I don't pretend to know what's going on, like with their lungs or anything like that. Like that's kind of out of my realm. But what I can do is help them with their overall breathing, and that tends to help them with the symptoms they have. So if we go back to just learning how to breathe in a more relaxed way, so a lot of times we'll do everything we've already talked about, like building CO2 tolerance from that end of things, but also just working the ability to breathe into your belly, to do diaphragmatic breathing, which is more relaxed versus breathing with your shoulders, trying to breathe into your belly. So really just kind of working, honestly, like going back to the basics of breathing, working on nasal breathing, working on breathing with your diaphragm, building CO2 tolerance, helping people sleep better, doing these things, exercising while breathing through your nose and kind of lowering the intensity, because so many of us are used to just going all out every workout, like kind of teaching, pull it back a little bit. You're not going to the Olympics right now. Like pull it back, go at a lower intensity, and just kind of, get your body breathing better again, has tended to help a lot of those side effects.
I wonder, because, shortness of breath is a huge, it's one of the major symptoms of COVID as well as long COVID. And I wonder, what that is, because a lot of what we talk about with nose breathing is, the need for less air, and, the shortness of breath feeling is that feeling where you feel like you're just out of shape, like
Right.
it's that feeling you get when after you've been sick for a while and haven't been able to work out,
It's
you
not
just,
fun.
it's not fun. And,
Yeah.
we've all been there. That's interesting what you said, how you can intentionally work on the breathing, even if you're not working out. Cause I think my natural would be to,
Mhm.
okay, let's work our way up. Today I walk, 100 yards. Tomorrow I walk 200 yards up to a mile. Okay. Then I start a jog. What's is that the way you look
Mhm.
at it as well? Or are you saying that,
Yeah.
we can actually work on our breathing without, taking the steps necessarily, and work on nose breathing, work on CO2 tolerance, work on diaphragm breathing?
Mhm.
What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. You can begin by laying on the ground and, like just one of the simplest ones is to make your exhale twice as long as your inhale and just find like a cadence that's slightly challenging for you and do that for 5 to 10 minutes. So
Mm,
say you breathe in for 4 seconds and out for 8 seconds, and you just do that over and over again, and you're going to get really relaxed. But if you make it slightly challenging, you can also definitely lengthen your CO2 tolerance or make it greater. Um, the other thing, to tie this all the way back, tie this training aspect back to sleep apnea as well, is we also want to work on being able to essentially have like less pressure when you breathe. So instead of it being like a forceful inhale and exhale, for it to be subtle in and out. And a lot of that comes with like respiratory muscular training. So diaphragm training, kind of other muscles that go, pelvic floor training, other things that go in with breathing. So you can definitely practice that by breathing, with your back on the ground and trying to expand your stomach with every inhale. And there's devices like one that I use called an AeroFit, where you can train by making the inhale and exhale harder. You can train to strengthen your breathing. And that goes back to sleep apnea, because if you're breathing hard when you're sleeping, that also will cause you to, like, if you think about if you had like a paper straw and you breathe in and out of it super easy, it would just flow naturally.
yeah.
But if you sucked really hard, it would collapse. Um,
Oh, interesting.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's the same thing when we're breathing out. So it's not just like how much space we have to breathe, it's how hard and fast we're breathing. So if we can kind of learn to have stronger respiratory muscles to actually be able to breathe slower and gentler, that'll help all breathing in general.
That's and I'm assuming the way you're looking at it is if we train these things while we're conscious and,
Yeah,
awake, that's going to translate over to when, we're, not focused on our breathing, of course, when we're sleeping. Is that kind of how it works?
absolutely.
If
Yeah,
Okay.
100%. Yeah, if
That's
you're
super fascinating to me. You
No, I was just gonna say, yeah, that's right. I mean, especially if you're like, actually, if you're up to the point where you can exercise nasal breathing only when you're sleeping, it's gonna be much, much easier to keep your mouth closed.
And of course, if you use the tape that you mentioned and,
Mhm.
that's kind of one way of forcing yourself
Yeah,
to
and the goal is to graduate out of that, like we were talking about. Like you start with that as a good reminder and to make it happen while you're sleeping, but the goal isn't to just tape your mouth the rest of your life. The goal is to graduate out of that.
This might be a stupid question, but can you have sleep apnea if you don't open your mouth while you're sleeping?
I think there are structural ways that could happen, especially maybe if you have a large soft palate that falls back. And people can snore in and out their nose, but a lot of the times you snore with your mouth closed. That's because of that pressure I was just describing.
So, okay. So for most people,
For most people, yeah,
if you can learn to nose breathe, it could solve, sleep apnea for you.
yeah, especially if it's a milder. Like I want to
Right.
just go ahead and say, like there are like people who have serious obstructive sleep apnea and things that are going on that have to be fixed. Yeah.
Right. It's super fascinating. And I've even heard people talk about how, I don't think breathing through your nose has like cured a deviated septum, but it's
It'll
definitely,
open it up.
it'll open it up a little bit, just the practice of it, and again, we're speaking in general terms here,
Mhm.
uh, there's of course always, cases that are a little more extreme that might,
Mhm.
uh, need other things. But real quick,
I,
I want to be, respectful of your time. Is there any parting advice you have for the people, listening to this episode with you, just in terms of like, if they think they might have sleep apnea and don't know, or even if they do have sleep apnea and, things that they can kind of, start doing right now.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say if you're not sure, if you have a spouse or somebody, you could just ask if you snore or not. I mean, I think if you snore, that's enough to start working on something.
Okay.
And yeah, the easiest places to start are just being conscious of how you breathe throughout the day, catching yourself if you're breathing in and out your mouth. Even just doing like once a day, even if you don't follow a specific protocol, but just sitting for 3 to 5 minutes and doing slowing your breathing down is going to help. It's going to help you sleep better. And then, yeah, probably last step would just be taping your mouth at night. And again, it doesn't have to be anything crazy. You can just take a small piece of cloth tape over kind of just below your nose and down. Those are 3 easy steps. And then obviously just adding in exercise if you're not exercising, just getting some movement in each day.
And one thing we'll do, guys, is maybe even in the editing room, we'll get Zack or Jenny to put up a PDF that this Zack, our video editor, we'll go back in here and put up the PDF that you sent me the other week, which is super informative. It kind of explains a lot of what we've talked about today. Real quick, Zack, like how can people reach you if they want to actually go the next level and really train with you? And you mentioned personalization of it. How can they get a hold of you? Where do we find you?
Yeah. The easiest place is trinitystrength.org. That's my website. There's a place in the corner that just says like book an intro. You're more than welcome just to click on there and we can hop on a call and talk through what you're going through. And then, yeah, maybe in the show notes also, I've got a kind of like a unlisted website with a bunch of resources for sleep apnea where you can contact me as well. So maybe we'll put that in the show notes.
We'll definitely do that. We'll put that in the show notes, guys. Zack Kramer, it's been a pleasure, man. I'm so happy that you hopped on. Thank you for doing this with us.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. This has been Outside the Box. As always, we will see you guys next time. Zack, I'll see you later, brother.
All right, see ya.
No, don't go away.